We mentioned it briefly earlier, but the Elanga deal, a lot of reports that it's now accelerating quickly, and a agreement between Nottingham Forest and Newcastle for somewhere in the region of £55 million is reported to be close. Is that your understanding, Ben?
Yeah, I think the expectation from Nottingham Forest is they wanted a total package of around 60 million, if not slightly north of that. The last bid from Newcastle United was around 55 million, but they're not that far apart in their valuation. Personal terms still need to be agreed with Elanga, but this one has really moved in the last 24, 48 hours. And Newcastle, after their first rejected bid of 45 million for Anthony Elanga, which was dismissed out of hand, have done what Manchester United did with Mbeumo. They've taken a couple of weeks. They've bid a second time with a bit more information and clarity and confidence, and they're not far off now. And my expectation is that Newcastle are really pushing to get this one done. And I think there's a strong chance that it does get over the line, because although Elanga hasn't agreed personal terms, my understanding is that he is interested in a move to Newcastle United. Strengthening on that right-hand side has been a huge priority for Newcastle ever since really Miguel Almiron went to Atlanta United. And at the time we're live, I can tell you those talks between Newcastle and Nottingham Forest are really advanced over the structure of the deal, over the add-ons, over the payment terms. And then we see whether or not Elanga finalises his own agreement with Newcastle United. But I think this deal can be referred to as close, and it could well happen sooner rather than later.
Makes perfect sense. Makes absolute perfect sense to me. I think these things take a little bit of time. And as a United fan, you know, I've read that we're getting at least 5 to 6 million, but it could be even higher than that with a sell-on clause. So thank you, Newcastle. And hopefully the bids keep getting bigger and bigger because United will earn more money. So Newcastle helping. I'm going to do a typical fan thing. Newcastle are helping to fund our move for Mbeumo. So thank you. I appreciate it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Newcastle fans. In relation to Chelsea, there's a player I wanted to ask your views on. Mohammed Kudus. We know Spurs want him. Chelsea reportedly have offered sort of swap deals. What's your latest understanding of the situation with Kudus and the likelihood of his next destination?
Yeah, I don't think Chelsea have offered swap deals. I think West Ham offered Kudus to Chelsea. Okay. And in those conversations, a couple of Chelsea players came up. Rob Sanchez, Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, even Carney Chukwuemeka is of interest to West Ham United, but I'm not aware that anything has developed there. We know that Graham Potter knows Rob Sanchez very well. So let's sort of see if there's any possibility of engagement there between the clubs. But I don't think it was ever a case of a swap deal. And I don't think Chelsea were necessarily the ones initiating those Kudus talks. Right now, you have Tottenham, who are focused on Kudus over Eberechi Eze. And they believe that West Ham might sell for a number in the region of 60 million. But Kudus has an 85 million release clause. And Tottenham and West Ham don't do a great deal of business together. So getting value for Daniel Levy and Kudus could be quite difficult. And you might find that there's one price for other clubs that could be 60, 65. There's one price for Spurs because West Ham don't like selling to Spurs or vice versa. Yeah. And then there's one price, as we know, for European clubs, which is an 80 million release clause instead of 85 for Premier League teams. And there's a 120 million clause for Saudi clubs too. So Tottenham are the ones really working on Kudus. He's their top priority at the moment in this attack-minded position. And then you also have Saudi interest, and we mustn't discount that. Al Nassr in particular are really keen on Kudus. They're not going to pay the £120 million, but they might offer more than a Premier League club like Tottenham. And then West Ham would obviously welcome a sale to Saudi Arabia. But I'm not so sure that the player's going to bite with Saudi. I think he wants to stay in the Premier League or certainly a Big Five league in Europe. But let's wait and see, because money can talk in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So this is a really interesting one, because West Ham want to sell Kudus, even though he's a fantastic player. Some would say they need to sell Kudus. And the most fascinating thing in all of this will be, how badly is that need to sell? Is it a now situation? And don't assume because the financial year date has passed that this is the end of West Ham United's financial year, because there is that near miss period where if you show you are working on an outgoing before the financial year closes, in the 2 or 3 weeks that follow, if you get it over the line, you can make a pitch for an exemption to put that money on the financial year that everyone is assuming has closed. So don't presume that these PSR issues are over. Don't assume that clubs are not still trying to sell fast. So if Tottenham have made a bid, and we've heard some reports of that for Kudus, then you have plenty of evidence that you were trying to get this one done by the end of the financial year. If it happens in the next 7 to 10 days, you would still likely be able to put that on the last financial year. So the Kudus situation, if West Ham need a sale, could develop relatively quickly in the next week or two. And that's where we'll find out, are West Ham begrudgingly resigned to the fact that they need to sell Kudus potentially to Spurs? Saudi is a very interesting one because their window was not supposed to open until July the 20th, but Al Hilal wanted to sign Hamdallah in time for the Club World Cup because both Leonardo and Mitrovic are unavailable for their quarter-final against Fluminense. So they agreed a loan deal with Al Shabab for Hamdallah, who scored 21 goals in Saudi last season. But the only way they could register him for the loan was by the Saudi FA opening the window earlier. No problem with the Club World Cup deadline, but you still got to register the player with the Saudi FA, and the Saudi window was not open originally until July the 20th. Why is that important? Because overnight, on July the 2nd, the Saudi FA said, fine, we'll just move our window forwards by 17 days. So now the Saudi window is open. And what that means is Al Nassr are going to escalate business that was always originally the end of July and move it into the early part of July. So now let's see whether they enter the race for Mohammed Kudus, whether they place a bid for Luis Diaz, whether they move in the direction of Gabriel Martinelli. But that Al Nassr situation, because they want to back Cristiano Ronaldo after he extended, is also going to be one to watch. And if it isn't to be Spurs and Kudus, keep an eye on whether Al Nassr also enter the race.
I hear what you're saying there. This user here says, smile, Terry. Do you know what it is? It's because I'm listening. I may not always be looking at my camera because I'm making sure I think it's working, but I'm listening. Maybe that's why when it comes to transfer conversations, I have a lot of panelists that come on and they say things, and I just think, you've not read the article or listened to the breakdown at all, have you? It's important to listen. If you listen, you'd understand that a little bit more. Listen, I want to thank every single person who's tuned in. Ben, always a pleasure to sit here and speak. And I know the time difference is crazy, and you've got a long day ahead because Chelsea kick off in about 11 hours time. There's a game before it, and I'm sure you're going to be on that phone absolutely all day. Thank you very much for coming on. Beautiful words at the beginning of the show in relation to Jota and his brother, of course, Andre Silva as well.